So thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting conference. I think, as also Professor Casanova said, it's a very important issue to think in a historical way about phenomena we have now as challenges in our lives, so like illiberalism, populism, etc., because maybe we are not facing completely new problems, but we had to face this kind of problems even in the history, and then maybe we can learn something from it. My own project is, I'm about finishing at the University of Zurich, is also a bit about historizing some concepts we are using mostly today. So for example, judicial activism and critics of judicial review. In my project, it's about Hans Kelsen and his role as a constitutional judge in the first Austrian Republic, because he was facing same critics like, I don't know, the Israeli Supreme Court now, or the Hungarian was faced also after Orban. And why is Kelsen is interesting? Because he tried to answer to this kind of critics with his own theory. But now I will talk about other topic. Maybe we can call it like an Austrian case study of illiberalism, or maybe a quite interesting kind of liberalism, the national liberalism, which is also interesting in Austria because it is a nationalism in Austria which rejects their own nation and the independence of the Austrian nation. So in late October this year, Walter Rosenkranz was elected president of the Austrian parliament. Rosenkranz, a politician from Austria's far-right Freedom Party, FPÖ, is also affiliated with the Vienna-based fraternity Burschenschaft Libertas. He's Walter Rosenkranz in this Burschenschaft cap. The fraternity's website prominently displays a black, red, and gold German flag, illustrating how nationalism in Austria can align with the German identity. This kind of German nationalism explicitly reinforced in the FPÖ's current manifesto, which asserts, I'm quoting, Austria's language, history, and culture are German. The majority of Austrians belong to the German ethnic, linguistic, and cultural community. End of the quote. So there is no debate about the own Austrian identity and nation for FPÖ. In 1988, former FPÖ leader Jörg Haider expressed this perspective even more bluntly in an interview, stating, I quote, "You know as well as I do that the Austrian nation was a misbirth, Missgeburt, an ideological misbirth. Ethnic affiliation is one thing, state affiliation is another." End of the quote. Haider's remark about the misbirth refers to Austria's post-war independence as a small state following the First and the Second World Wars. So in my presentation, I will examine the complexities of Austrian nationhood as a foundation or as a reason for this kind of German, so not Austrian nationalism, Deutschnationalismus in Austria, with a particular focus on the historical role of so-called third camp, so the German national camp, as the root of the FPÖ. I will also analyze which elements of German nationalism persist within today's FPÖ and explore how this German nationalism has largely evolved into a more pragmatic Austrian patriotism in today's Austria. So the national question poses a persistent challenge within Habsburg Austria. We know all these debates from the historiography. The Austrian territories were ethnically and linguistically diverse, making it impossible to base the state on a single national identity. This complex framework, so this framework where it was not possible to have one nation with a cultural identity, so this complex framework fostered a highly formalistic and legalistic approach to statehood, ultimately theorized by Hans Kelsen in his full theory of law. Kelsen argued that the state does not need to be based on a single nation identity, Instead, it functions as a legal framework that can encompass people of very different nationalities, religions, and other affiliations. Kelsen wrote that he may have arrived at this perspective quotation because the state that was closest to me and which I know best from personal experience, so the Austrian state, was clearly only a legal entity. Considering the Austrian state, which was composed of so many groups differing in race, language, religion, and history, theories that attempted to ground the unity of the state in some socio-psychological or socio-biological connection among its citizens who belong to the same state clearly prove to be fictions. So that is in German from him. So that's why there was a problem with the Austrian nation, because that was only a legal unity and not a national unity. But Eric Voegelin later criticized this approach, saying that it is really too abstract, too legalistic, too formalistic. There is nothing essential in this Austrian identity. He argued that the failures of the First Republic, so post-Habsburg Austria, stemmed from its inability to establish a cohesive national identity. Quotation from Voegelin: "The unique state problem of the monarchy continued in the Republic of Austria after 1918. The state identity was established in an era of intense democratic ideas, but without a people demos possessing a true will for the state." According to Voegelin, Austrian politics in the First Republic was polarized by three main political factions that behaved almost like distinct national groups. So he was saying that practically the nationality problem was continued in the First Republic, but not among nationalities, but among the new parties: clericals, social democrats, and the national liberals or German nationalists. These three camps all trace their origins back to the 1882 Manifesto of Linz, a document co-authored by figures like the future social democrat Viktor Adler and the anti-Semite Georg von Schönerer. This program called for a split from the Hungarian territories and the closer alignment of German-speaking regions with the German Reich, marking it as a foundational document of a German nationalist camp in Austria. In the ethnically diverse Habsburg monarchy, the national liberals developed a particularly German nationalist stance opposed to the Habsburg monarchy itself and especially to Slavic groups within the empire. The so-called third camp distinguished itself by its anti-Habsburg, anti-clerical, often Protestant, anti-socialist, and nationalist ideas. The national question in Austria remained unresolved also after World War I, and the third camp supported the idea of Anschluss annexation with Germany. But during the First Republic, all major parties, including the Social Democrats, advocated for closer ties with Germany. The third camp, so the German national camp itself, was represented in the First Republic by various parties. Some was more liberal, some more nationalist. But the most important among these German nationalist parties was the Greater German People's Party, Großdeutsche Volkspartei, which participated in several right-wing governments after 1920. This party, so the Great German People's Party, shared ideological ground with both the Social Democrats and the Christian Socialists. Like the Social Democrats, it supported pro-German, anti-clerical, and centralist stasis, such as in the debates about marriage law or state structure. But it is also aligned with the Christian socialist in its anti-Semitism, anti-socialist, and pro-capitalist policies. Over the time, the third camp gave rise to Austrian National Socialism as well, as more liberal and Jewish voices within the third camp were marginalized. So the question whether Austria is their own nation or not was still quite discussed, not only in the First Republic, but also during the Second World War. So the question whether Austria constitutes its own nation or should be re-established as a separate state after the Second World War remained contentious even among Austrian exiles during World War I. Among these groups, only the communists, following Stalin's directives, and the small group of Habsburg monarchists asserted that Austria was not part of the German nation. For example, the Social Democrats, they were quite, they supported closely a big German solution even after the Second World War. Austrian communist Alfred Klar developed a theoretical basis for Austrian national independence in 1937, drawing on the ideas of Otto Bauer, Lenin, and Stalin, who defined nationwide historical and economic development rather than ethnic uniformity. Klar argued, quotation, the notion that the Austrian people are part of the German nation is theoretically unfounded. A unified German nation, including Austrians, has never existed and does not exist today. The Austrian people have lived under different economic and political conditions than other Germans in the Reich and have thus taken a separate national path. End of the quotation. The fact that Austria's independence and independent national identity was championed by both communist and Habsburg monarchies underscores the paradoxes within Austria's complex history and identity. And Jörg Haider said that Austria's independence was actually, quotation, a communist Habsburg conspiracy against the German nation. End of the quotation. So in the Second Republic, the concept of an independent Austria gradually took root, largely due to the country's neutrality and post-war economic recovery. Following the political turbulences of the First Republic, Austria's major parties wanted to build a Second Republic that would be free from polarization and based on compromise. This effort led to the formation of the so-called Grand Coalition, a collaboration between the conservatives, social democrats, and at the beginning also with communists. However, over 700,000 former members of the Nazi Party were banned from participating in politics. With typical Austrian understatement, these individuals were referred to as the ehemaligen, the former ones. So they didn't know them as ex-Nazis, but only the former ones. Those former ones who remained loyal to the third camp organized in the League of Independence, Verband der Unabhängigen, which got nearly 12% of the vote in the 49 parliamentary elections, advocating primarily for amnesty for former NSDAP members. In its manifesto, the manifesto of this party 54, the party explicitly supported German nationalism, stating, quotation, Austria is a German state, its politics must serve the entire German nation and must never be directed against another German state, end of quotation. Following the State Treaty of 1955, which established Austria's independence, the issue of sovereignty was pragmatically resolved and addressed in Austria through the neutrality. This explains why the third camp adopted a strongly pro-Western and anti-neutrality stance, fearing that neutrality could be used to distance Austria from Western Germany. The Freedom Party of Austria, FPÖ, was founded in 1955 as the successor to the League of Independence. Unlike the larger People's Party, ÖVP, and Social Democrats, SPÖ, the FPÖ was a smaller party, drawing support mainly from high-level bureaucrats, freelancers, and small industrialists. Continuities with National Socialism were evident in the party's leadership. Until 1978, the FPÖ was led by individuals with SS background, Anton Reintaler and then Friedrich Péter. And many of the party's intellectual supporters were openly anti-Semitic, such as Professor Taras Borodajkevich, a fervent German nationalist economist with a nice Polish surname. Despite these connections, the FPÖ also defined itself as a liberal party, not only economically, but socially as well. For example, the FPÖ was one of the few Austrian parties to advocate for NATO membership and was an early supporter of European integration. As I said, they were against neutrality because they said that neutrality is was something against the German unity. Although its longtime leader, Friedrich Péter, had been an SS Obersturmführer, he tried to reposition the FPÖ from the 70s onward as a national liberal, progressist, pro-European party. And under the leadership of Norbert Steger, the FPÖ, with its strongly liberal orientation, even entered a government coalition with the Social Democrats between 1983 and 96. And then came Haider. In 1986, Jörg Haider, a young politician from Carinthia, took over the leadership of the FPÖ. Haider's ambitions extended beyond leading a party associated with the former ones. He shifted the FPÖ's ideology from its liberal, state-critical roots toward more radical anti-system rhetoric. Haider positioned himself as neoliberal opponent of Austria's corporatist model, the proposed system. Haider's rhetoric retained its roots in German nationalism and anti-Semitism, but he began to move away from key elements of traditional German nationalist ideology. So I made some issues how it's changed during Haider. On social issues, for example, the FPÖ, which had traditionally supported progressive ideas, for example, in the marriage policy, shifted toward more conservative positions under Haider. The party aligned more closely with right-wing Catholic circles rather than progressive ones, and Haider also moved away from the Protestant character of the party that had been associated with the FPÖ. Additionally, while the traditional German nationalist FPÖ had supported European and transatlantic integration, Haider's FPÖ took a strong stance against both the European Union and NATO. This populist shift allowed Haider to attract working class voters, a group that had traditionally been outside the FPÖ's traditional base. Despite these changes, the intellectual legacy of German nationalism remains present within the party. Prominent figures associated with the FPÖ, such as historian in Vienna Lothar Höbel, the legal historian Wilhelm Brauneder, journalist Andreas Mölzer, continue to support German nationalist ideas, even often downplaying the significance of Austrian history and identity. However, if the FPÖ were solely reliant on German nationalist or national liberal voters, it could lose its presence in the parliament. The national liberal voter base is relatively small, and these voters have other political options as well. In 1992, the FPÖ's left liberal faction split off under Haider Schmidt to form the new party Liberal Forum, which later merged with the current liberal party NEOS. NEOS now embraces the liberal tradition of 1848 that the FPÖ once promoted, but of course without a German nationalist understatement. The shift away from German nationalism in FPÖ has continued under the leadership of Heinz Christian Strache and more recently Herbert Kickl. They have distanced the party even from anti-Semitism, reframing anti-Muslim sentiment as a form of philo-Semitism. However, scandals linked to German nationalist circles still emerge. For example, an SS song was sung at the funeral of an FPÖ politician in October this year. Moreover, Rosenkranz, so the president of the Austrian parliament, continues to uphold the old ideas of German nationalism, leading Jewish organizations in Austria to refuse collaboration with him. So what is the role of German nationalism today? I would say it is nowadays more a folklore than an important content of today's FPÖ. The question of whether Austria is part of the German nation or not no longer interests voters. But the essentialist concept of nation rooted in German nationalism continues to influence the ideology of FPÖ, especially in its campaign against migration or supranational cooperation like the EU. Thank you very much.